Atlanta and how Zoma's run out of water a couple times over the last few years. It's the new normal given climate change. And then on Thursday, our master's advisor, Alistair McIntosh, is coming to campus. Going to look at, he's from the Isle of Lewis in Scotland, the Hebrides, and Donald Trump's mother was there. So he's going to trace the clearances of those islands and the forceful eviction of the indigenous people of those islands and how they came to the States and trace that lineage through white evangelicals as being supportive of Trump's policies and looking at intergenerational trauma and justice issues. It'll be really interesting talk there. Looking at cultural roots of largely what we call inequalities broadly, which is a key concern of the triple bottom line, how do we make a more just society for everybody. And so that brings us to today's talk with Caryl Stern, which is going to be on fundamental right of water, especially for young children, the most vulnerable in our society. And how this is both a public health issue, a legal rights issue, a basic issue of justice and ethics, right? What are our obligations to our fellow humans in our communities? Issue of economics. Why do kids around the world not have basic access to clean potable water? And therefore an environmental scientific question. Why is this water dirty and how can we clean it up? So very, very much this talk will be about a good example of the triple bottom line in action, how the systems interact, and how we can make water accessible to the most vulnerable on our planet, which is what Caryl's devoted the last few years of her life to. So I'm going to read a little bit more about Caryl and then turn the floor over. Caryl is the president and CEO of UNICEF USA. UNICEF works with the United Nations and now under the auspices of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. She is an activist, author, executive, public speaker, mother of 3, and grandmother of 2. A dynamic change maker. Caryl has dedicated her career to helping others through education, compassion, advocacy, and rolling up her sleeves. And if that's not something to aspire for as you all graduate, I don't know what is. Since 2007, she served as president and CEO of the UNICEF USA, an organization that supports UNICEF's life-saving work to put children first. Part of her talk will be telling you more about this great work of UNICEF. Under her leadership, UNICEF USA has nearly doubled its fundraising revenue, secured multi-million-dollar commitments in support of the world's children, and launched UNICEF Kid Power, the world's first wearable for good that empowers kids to get active and save lives. Stern has traveled to more than 30 countries in support of this work, and has spearheaded the organization's emergency relief efforts for children affected by disasters, including the 2010 Haiti earthquake, the 2011 East African drought, the Ebola and Zika epidemics, and the ongoing global refugee and migrant crisis. And at lunch, she was telling us about how she's been going to Syria and refugee camps there, and also working at the border of the U.S. and Mexico with children who are trying to come north at the border and are sent back. And they don't have water, and they really don't have anybody to care for them, so that's also some focus of her recent work. Overall, Caryl campaigns and organizes on the topics of kids helping kids, children and philanthropy, anti-bullying and international development. And because of this work, Stern was invited to present at the White House's inaugural summit on the United States of Women. Stern serves on the board of directors of the Container Store and the We Are Family Foundation, the advisory board to the WNBA, and the advisory council of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. Prior to joining the U.S. Fund for UNICEF, Stern was an executive at the Anti-Defamation League, founding director of its World of Difference Institute, and the Dean of Students at Polytechnic University, that comes from a background in higher ed. So, Caryl, I appreciate you very much coming here today to share your wisdom, your passion, your dignity, your work for children, water, and join me in welcoming Caryl.
My bio, that's why it's so much. Thank you, and thank you, Olivia, because it's kind of fun to be here to go to school. That's for me the whole. So I'm going to dive right in so that we have time for questions, but let me just give you a little background because I know some of you are graduating and I was asking you what you're going to do next year, and I love all the myriad of things I heard about, and I know for me, I had no idea what I was going to do when I got out of school, so I think it's great to have plans. But I really come to this work because I am the child of a child refugee. And I have a picture that kind of stays in my head with everything that I do. And that's a picture of this little girl who's got her arm around this little boy. The little girl is 6, the little boy is just turning 4. And they're getting ready to board a ship that is bound for a country that speaks a language that neither of them speak, that neither of them can find on a map because the little girl has started school, the little boy has not even started school yet. And they've only learned 24 hours ago they will be traveling. and they're traveling with neither their mother nor their father, but with a woman who they will never see again once they arrive on the shores of the United States. The year is 1939. The little girl is my mom, the little boy my uncle, and their parents had bought them passage to the United States because the Nazis had invaded Austria, and it is the only way to save their lives is to send them away for what they thought would be a couple of weeks, which turned into ultimately my mom didn't see her mother again for 10 years. And so it is that story that kind of compels me to do what I do for a living, but in particular the story of the woman who brought them across the ocean, because she did it at her risk of her own life. And again, they don't even know her first name because she was Mrs. So-and-so because they were children and they never saw her again. So at the same time, though my grandfather boarded this ship, which is called the SS St. Louis. It's often called the Voyage of the Damned. It was a boat with roughly 1,100 passengers, most of them Jews, many of the others sympathizers, and they had bought passage on the ship with everything they owned. It was an expensive endeavor to go to Cuba, where my grandfather was going to start his life again, send for his kids in the United States, eventually get his wife out of Austria. But upon arrival in Cuba, they learned that the documents they paid so dearly for were fraudulent, and Cuba wouldn't let them in. And the boat sat in a harbor for 40 days while the world debated the fate of its passengers. And ultimately, even the United States would not take them, and they were sent back to Europe where most perished at the hands of the Nazis. But my grandfather was one of very few who survived. So I had a childhood in which there were two stories repeatedly told. One about this woman who made a difference, this woman who just made this big choice, and I would not exist if not for this one woman. And the other about what happens when the world turns its back, and when nobody gives a damn, and then people actually die. And so it's really not surprising that I do what I do for a living, or that my brother ended up in what he does, because we were kind of destined to be active. My mother truly believed if you were not part of the solution, you were not part of the problem, you were the problem. And so from the moment that we were old enough to carry a sign, there was a sign in our hand, we marched on everything. You know, we were part of the anti-war movement, we were part of the civil rights movement, we were part of women's rights movement, gay rights movement, we fought for hate crime laws. My mother had us in the street yelling, screaming, marching on everything. So a long time forward, and I get the opportunity to come to UNICEF. And all I know about UNICEF at that point is something called Trick or Treat for UNICEF. I see a couple of nuts. How many of you have ever trick or treated for UNICEF? Yeah, I've got a couple of answers. So 1 in 10 Americans has trick or treated for UNICEF. For those that don't know what we're talking about, you get a little orange box today when, I would say when we were children. You got a little milk carton and you put your change in. But in any case, you ring your doorbell, you say trick or treat, and you ask for change, and that money goes to UNICEF. And we do raise about $4 or $5 million a year still on trick or treat for UNICEF. But UNICEF is a great deal more than that. It is an organization that is over 60 years old, 12,000 boots on the ground, 190 countries and territories. And basically, UNICEF does whatever it takes to save a child anywhere in the world. That can be water and sanitation, which we're going to talk about today, but it's immunizations. UNICEF immunizes more than half the world's children. It's education, it's nutrition, it's the response to the HIV/AIDS epidemic, it's protection, advocacy, and emergency response. So I do all this reading and I learn all about UNICEF, and I say to them, why should I take this job? And they said, because if you take this job, we're going to take you to Africa, we're going to put a baby in your arms, we're going to teach you how to give an immunization. You'll immunize that child, and if you do nothing else for the rest of your life, you will know there's a child alive in Africa because of something you did. So it's pretty hard to turn down a job like that. And so for my 50th birthday, I took over as the CEO of UNICEF 11 years ago. And at that time, 26,000 children were dying each and every day, all under the age of 5, of causes we already knew how to prevent. 26,000 yesterday, today, tomorrow. Every day, 26,000 kids, all under the age of 5, dying of causes we know how to prevent. So not a disease we don't have a cure for, not a natural disaster that we can't, predict, but things like lack of water, lack of food, lack of shelter, freezing to death, diarrhea, things that are curable, but we're just not getting to them on time. Today, that number stands at 15,000. So while you go about your business today, 15,000 kids under the age of 5 will die of causes we know how to prevent, but we're just not getting to them in time. So it's a really amazing decrease from 26,000 a day to 15,000. But as I said to somebody at lunch today, if your child is one of those 15,000, you know very well that 15,000 is far too many. And that even the death of one child that you should have prevented or you could have prevented but didn't is one too many. There's some seats up here you can take. So our goal on our campaign is to bring that number all the way to zero. So if you get bored after you graduate or over the summer, there's a wonderful book called I Believe in Zero, written by Caryl. And don't wait for the movie, please buy the book. But it is all about the stories of children and the goal of trying to get that number to zero. But I know that what I was asked to talk to you about is water and sanitation and hygiene. Wash. Water is a right. It's not. It is treated often as a privilege, but it should be a right. We cannot live without water. And it is important that we promote the right to clean, safe water and sanitation. And it's not just about the body's need for water. It is about what having a lack of water does in other areas as well. It's part of what Todd was saying earlier. So UNICEF has a big section of it called WASH, and it is to ensure not only that we put in water systems, that we put in access, but that we also stop the impact of the lack of water on girls in particular. It is the girls that are asked to fetch water, and usually I can tell you collectively today, 200 million hours were spent around the world fetching water. 200 million hours a day were spent fetching water by global girls who should be in school and are not. And every day, roughly 266 million girls and women go without any form of sanitation in their community. And the reason I separate the girls from the boys in that case is it's socially in most of the cultures acceptable for the men to openly urinate or defecate in the community, but not the women. And so the women are still forced to find private space in places where there is no private space, in places where they are often physically attacked in the process of trying to just take care of their body. So it becomes a gender issue. It's not just an issue of the water itself. In addition, the most effective thing after immunization and bringing that number from 26,000 every day down to 15,000 was teaching people to wash their hands. The most effective tool in saving the lives of kids is teaching people to wash their hands. And I will tell you that after the Haiti earthquake, we did a lot of classes in Haiti around hand washing. And when I went back, one of the little girls said to me, Caryl, show me how you wash your hands. And I learned I didn't wash my hands correctly. So, because Americans, we wash our hands like this. And the best way to really protect yourself is to wash your hands like this. And when they showed me, I think these girls very diligently explained to me how Americans leave germs between their fingers all the time. So you're going to wash your hands today. When we talk about water, though, we're not only talking about getting the supply from here to there. Part of what UNICEF does is we work with governments to put in systems. So it's not about just trucking water. It is about ensuring that there's an actual system. It's also about, and I talked a little at lunch about this, about putting a well where there's a school. So that if girls have to fetch water, then they can fetch it at school, and that will allow them to spend part of their day at least in the classroom. It is about making sure there's a latrine at that school so if girls are menstruating, they don't have to stay home, because culturally otherwise they don't have to stay home. So again, it's often a little bit more about a gender issue. But the other big piece that UNICEF is taking on in the sustainability goals is really the impact of climate change. One of the biggest famines that I have confronted in my 11 years of running UNICEF USA took place in the Horn of Africa, and it really is a climate change famine. And as the water was becoming scarcer and scarcer, as the grass was becoming browner and browner, in countries in the north of Kenya in particular, in the east of Ethiopia, These are places where most of the people survive in a nomadic lifestyle. They have goats. They move from one place to another. As the grass gets brown, they move to the next place. When a drought sets in, there is no grass for the herd, and the herd dies. And when the herd dies, people were literally stalled in the desert with no idea what to do. Uneducated, don't read, don't write, have no idea what alternative way to live their lives when the herd is gone. And people were literally starving to death because of the impact of climate change in that region of the world. We try very hard to put in a number of different things now so that we never find ourselves in that position again. We're testing the different kinds of mitigation of what climate change is doing. We did in Ethiopia that following year during the rainy season do a rain collection, which actually kept Ethiopia out of the famine zone the following year because they were the only one in that area that still had enough water to sustain their crops. So there is disaster risk reduction, there's mitigation, there's government, there's hygiene, there's sanitation, and all of that falls under that rubric of WASHs. So let me tell you a little bit more about kind of the right to water. There are right now 844 million people around the world who still lack basic water service, which means they don't have a safe water source within a 30-minute walk where there is of what they call home. And I have been spent, as you heard, a long time in 30 different countries over the past 10 years. And in many of those, you will watch young girls fetch the water. It takes hours. These things are heavy to carry. Let me tell you, I would have brought a water jug if I could have gotten it on the plane today. But they're very heavy. But even with all of that, the source that they're taking water from is not clean to begin with. And it's not uncommon to see, oxen or cows or horse lying in the lake where they're taking the water that they're going to bring home to drink. So it gives you some sense of why so many children are dying from waterborne diseases, because they are unknowingly poisoning themselves. 2.3 billion people do not have basic sanitation. So while there are 892 million people who practice open defecation, there is still over 2 billion people who just don't have access to basic sanitation right in their homes. So there are some things that we take for granted here in this country that are obviously not taken for granted in other places around the world. And more than 700 kids die every day just due to lack of access to clean water. Every single day. And that's only the kids that you can directly correlate to water. As I said, of the 15,000 who will die, we can attribute the actual cause of death of half of them to scale back to lack of access to water, because it's the disease they contracted, or it's the weakness, or it's the stunting, or it's the other things that happen, the malnutrition that happens because the water dries up and they can't grow the right crops. And so that the lack of water has an impact of literally 7,500 deaths every single day. There are about right now 155 million kids under 5 who are stunted. And you can recognize stunting when you work in the field. The way we, first of all, do this is we measure a baby's weight each month, but we also measure the circumference of a baby's arm. And that's how you tell if babies are growing at the rate that they're supposed to by measuring arms. That's usually the first indication of malnutrition. And also the color of their hair. When you see that rust color in a baby's hair, you know the baby's fallen prey to malnutrition. Symptoms of malnutrition. And what we will often see is that the physical attributes are things that people can probably surpass, but there is a cognitive loss as well from stunting, and that is not a correctable cognitive loss. So not only do these children often suffer the physical disabilities, but they will never regain the mental capabilities that they were born with and never be able to reach their full potential. And once stunting is fully set in, there is nothing one can do. In the interim, though, when children are malnourished, if we get to them in time, we have something called Plumpy Nut, another product called Sprinkles, and they're nutrition-enhanced products. Plumpy Nut is like the miracle one, though. There are some other brands, but the one we use most is Plumpy Nut because it's a peanut butter-based It comes in a little packet. It doesn't have to be refrigerated, which is a really big issue in the field where there's no electricity. It doesn't have to be cooked. It just gets ripped open and you literally put it on your finger and you can put it right on a baby's tongue. And within 3 weeks of using Plumpy'Nut, you will see a severely malnourished child literally come back to life. It is one of the more amazing products that I've seen out in the field. So the other thing that I had talked about was what happens when there isn't enough water in terms of girls in school. When there aren't enough facilities, children miss out on education. Girls are almost always the one tasked with staying home from school to fetch the water. And then, as I had said earlier, if they are menstruating, they're kept out of school. We do an annual report of kind of the status of many things, and we found in 2017 that 19% of schools around the world have no water service or have unimproved water service in 2017. And that 72% of primary schools lack basic sanitation. So it's pretty dire. I wanted to give you a sense of what the day is like for a young girl in a developing nation. And this is going to be dependent on my ability to get the video to work. That's what happens. Yeah. Very typical story. This is not a unique situation. What a day is like, and if you noticed, the same water she washed in is the same water she collected to bring home, and you saw the color of that water that they were drinking when they got to work. So, just to give you a sense of some of the things we take for granted. So what do? We, again, try to provide access to safe water. We try to mediate and help them purify what water there is. We also try to give kids a chance to play. So for those that really have to fetch water, we have actually vetted teachers who take that walk with the girls every day so they can learn while they're walking. And the other piece is that we lobby the governments. One of the things that makes UNICEF unique is we're not just a deliverer of water systems, but we are an advocacy group that works in tandem with governments to demand that water is not a privilege, it is a right. Our reach, just to give you a sense of the successes today, our reach is that 109 WASH countries, more than 80 now have WASH in schools. In 2016, UNICEF had 660 WASH experts, people who have water expertise around the world. We don't just drill wells or build toilets. We generate demand for the services because on the scene of the open defecation, which clearly contributes to significant diseases, there's a cultural norm that you have to change. You have to make it not okay. And that takes a lot of hours to just convince people, and it usually starts with convincing a chief that something's got to change. And for those of you who've ever looked into this, the issue of female genital mutilation, the best way that that's ever been changed was by convincing a chief that he didn't want his daughter to marry a mutilated girl. And by convincing one chief, they saved the lives of umpteen girls. So similarly with water, it's about changing the cultural norm. So in 2016, UNICEF helped 10.6 million people gain access to water, 28.8 million more in humanitarian situations, those in refugee camps. I shared over lunch today also. When I first started to work at the Zatari camp, it was all tents, and we were trucking in water every day. Today, it's a city. The camp was designed originally for 30,000 people max. It's 125,000 people living in the camp at this point. And there is an entire water system, and we've now put in a water treatment plant so that the dirty water from the camp is being turned into gray water that's being used to fertilize the land surrounding the camp so that the host community benefits from the camp. But it's remarkable to see that in just 5 years, the change that has taken place. We helped 17 million people gain access to improved sanitation. We've had 7,138 schools in 71 countries we've constructed wash facilities in 1,654 health centers in 71 countries we have put water systems in. So we're slowly but surely making change, but it's going to take a bigger push. And about a year, almost 2 years ago now, a name that may be familiar to most of you, Beyonce was watching the news and she saw a report on the status of women in water in Burundi. And Beyonce has an organization with Gucci that she co-chairs with Selma Hayek called China for Change. And I'm on the board of China for Change, and I get this phone call the next day saying she saw this news report and she wants to change Burundi. And out of that, a project called Bay Good for Burundi was born, where we are literally going to bring water to everybody. It's been a phenomenal project. There are 2.2 million people in Burundi who lack access to clean water at the time that we started the project. Last year, we built 35 wells, which impacted 72,000 people, and we will build 85 wells this year, and our goal is over the next 3 years to reach every person in Burundi by having access within a 30-minute walk to one of those wells. So that at least the water they're getting will be clean. And what she has done is given her name to it, as well as she has made a financial contribution, but you will see starting in, I believe, July or August, you will start to see her out campaigning and inviting her fan base to support this project and help us bring water to the people of Burundi. That's one way. Another way that we do it, though, is just going town by town, collecting stories from the people that we know and trying to get out there and tell them. I was in Malawi when we opened a well. I will tell you, the day before, it was the first time I'd seen a community change. And the day before we opened it, the women said to me, "Come on, we want you to do the water walk with us." So I walked with them, and Malawi's got this big mountain, so it's like up the mountain, down the side of the mountain to get to the river. And it takes about 3.5 hours, and it's really hot. And by the time we got that water and got back, I was drenched in sweat, completely exhausted. But the women sang songs the whole time. They almost walked in a dance step. They locked arms going to the river. They took turns carrying the buckets coming back. There was such an amazing sense of community in this village. And those of you that know that Peace Corps in the book, the one thing I can assure you will come back with is the sense of community in these villages is so far superior to anything we will ever experience in our country. That it is all for one and one for all in ways that are phenomenal. And so the next day we opened this well, and there was dancing, and there was singing, and people were cheering, and everybody lined up to actually pump the well. And And the women, though, did tell me that they were worried about, would this change them, that they'd lose this time together. It was really kind of anthropologically kind of a really interesting question for us. How do you never take away what is so positively strong as you try to bring some modern concepts into a community? And I hope that we do a good job of that. The future will tell, but it was really pretty fascinating. But when we open a well, the other thing we do then often is to do something like this, which is a stream pipe, which allows for the kids to wash their hands. And you will see at night, just around the dinner time, these kids just lining up before they go into their homes to wash their hands. And it's a big sense of pride and they have access to this thing they can do. It's pretty remarkable. So again, what we take for granted. But we also call on Americans to participate. And we look to see how you can all help the developing world. So we started a project called the TAP Project. And the first part of the TAP Project, we had about 1,000 restaurants across America that when you went into their restaurants during World Water Week, which is March 22nd, is World Water Day, when you got your free glass of water, you were invited to pay $1 for it, and that dollar would go to UNICEF. So it would be like, what would you pay for that you usually get for free, and could we entice you to do that if you knew what it was going to buy? $1 buys enough good, clean drinking water for a child for 20 days. 20 days worth of water for $1. And we did that for a couple years, and then the novelty wore off, and then we went to the second iteration, which was what would you give up? How did you do that? Yes. What would you give up? Then what's something that you think you can't live without?
We're obsessed with our cell phones. Sometimes for good reasons. Other times we check for likes. And check. And check. Or read intriguing articles about, well, never mind. And if you've been out to dinner lately, we think we can't live without our phones. So why don't we use them to help provide something people actually can't live without? Clean water. At UNICEFTAPproject.org, you can do just that. Give clean water to a child in need by taking a challenge to not touch your phone. The longer you go without your phone, the more you can help UNICEF provide clean water for children. In fact, 10 minutes can provide a child with clean water for a day, so every minute counts. Keep going. If you can't resist any longer, our sponsors and donors will make a donation to the UNICEF TAP Project based on the time you went without your phone. At this point, you can make an even bigger difference by making a donation yourself. As little as $5 can provide a child clean water for 200 days. The fact that millions of children still live without something as basic as clean water is hard to put in perspective. So take a moment to reflect by going without something far less vital than water, your cell phone, at UNICEFTAPproject.org.
So we did that for 2 years, I think we actually did it. But then we found that people were greatly willing to put down their phones to a larger extent than our sponsors were willing to pay for it. So it kind of got problematic. But we have had some college campuses that have made commitments where students are actually saying, I will put my phone down for 10 minutes every day and I will donate the $1 every day that I do it. And so or other campuses, mom will donate the $1 for every 10 minutes you put it down. And so it is one of the ways college students in particular have been participating in supporting water campaigns. But I started by telling you that I was part of a very activist generation. We really believed we were going to change the world. I'd like to believe in some ways we did, and in other ways we still have a long way to go. But, as I said to you, not only did my family march, but as a generation we marched. And, we marched for everything from tuition assistance to civil rights. Olivia, your dad, will tell you we also once marched on our college campus because they changed the toilet paper from rolls to sheets and that signs and said it's not the issue, it's the tissue in the administration building. But we marched, and I am awed by the fact that, your generation, those of you who graduated, those of you who are currently students, you are the most activist generation to come along in a very, very long time. You grew up with things like mandatory service hours, so you understand from a very early age what giving back is all about. You, as early as kindergarten, were asked to do things. You were promised you a trick or treat for UNICEF. You had all kinds of volunteer opportunities. And you are also the largest generation ever. You are 80 million strong. 80 million strong, which is pretty remarkable. And you're going to make up over 50% of the workforce by the year 2020. So 80 million strong, 50% of the workforce, unbelievably activist. You will run America for the longest time period of any generation. You're going to run America for 40 years straight because of the expected lifespan of this generation. And so you have the opportunity to make this country whatever it is you envision it should be. You really do have that power sitting in your hands right now. You already know that you are the most globally aware, you are the most connected, you have an internet. You are also, according to all of the recent polls, the most educated population to come along. You're the most optimistic generation that we've had in a long time. But in addition to all of that, the current generation of college students is going to inherit $59 trillion of transferred wealth over the course of between 2007 and 2016. There's going to be a transfer of wealth to your generation that is $59 trillion worth. And that will get divided up amongst heirs, into taxes, into charities. Many of those decisions will be made by the populace at large. And so you have the power in your hands to really make a difference, to really be that person who will make a difference. So I'm going to kind of wrap up with one last story, and then I'll answer questions. And this is one of my favorites. So when I worked in any of the refugee camps, pretty much any of the villages, we're like the Pied Pipers. We have blue shirts. They say UNICEF. The kids all know UNICEF. We like kids. And so there's always like 10 kids hanging with your hands and your arms. And there's one on your back and there's a few that are on your legs. And it's just that kind of a day. But there's always those really shy kids. And the really shy kids walk behind you. And if you turn around, they turn around. They used to make eye contact. But they stay with you all day long. So I was in the Saturday camp, and this was last winter. It's in Jordan, because we did have a refugee camp. And it had snowed the night before. It was cold, so just cold and everyone's dressed. And we got out at about 5 o'clock in the morning to start working the camps, and you kind of peer out of your, you live in these little, like I call them containers, they're like little trailers, literally one little trailers. And I come out of my trailer, and this little boy is out there, no shoes on, wandering around, and with him is his sister, and he was about 3 or 4. His sister was about 12. She was carrying a baby on her hip. I don't really know whose baby it was. I never found that out, but they were behind me. And they were there all day. The entire day they walked behind us. And at about 5:30, 6 o'clock, we realized we had never stopped the entire day because we were just busy all day. But if we didn't stop to eat, the reality was the kids had eaten all day. And I was struck by that, first of all, because they hadn't complained all day. Now, I have 3 sons, as you've heard, and 2 grandchildren. And in my house, boy, if the breakfast wasn't on the table by 9 in the morning, because somebody was complaining about it. And it was really obvious to us that these kids were used to it all day because they had not complained. And in the middle of the day, I had been working in a tent where we were teaching them how to breastfeed. And we give them these biscuits that are filled with nutrients so that they can keep their bodies healthy enough to breastfeed. And they wanted me to eat one of the biscuits, so they gave me the biscuit. And at the time, I was trying really hard not to eat carbs, and so I had palmed my biscuit and stuck it in my backpack. And I remembered that I had it, and realizing that these kids hadn't eaten, he gave us a biscuit. I really expected he would do what an American kid was supposed to have to do. Take that biscuit, run off in the corner, and gobble it down before anybody sees it, and takes it away from me. And instead, there's 20 of us, 20 blue shirts standing around. He handed this child this biscuit, and he unwrapped it, and he looked at it, and without anyone telling him what to do, he broke it in half, and he gave half to me. And all 20 of us cried. It was the most remarkable thing to me because we live in a country where we take so much for granted. And as I said, $1, that's what it takes for triathletes to sustain life for somebody. And this little boy who had nothing at all knew that whatever he had, he shared. And I leave you with that thought as you consider what you're going to do for the summer, what you're going to do when you graduate. And it's not just dollars, it's what you do with your time. It's being responsible enough to care